Hey listeners, we're nearing the end of our 15th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we need your help to meet our goal. This campaign offers you a chance to win a unique food and music experience in one of the most exciting cities in America. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and you'll be entered to win dinner for two and 2 tickets to a concert in one of 8 amazing cities: New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and Asheville. All donations support our work educating food system storytellers. And when you donate, you can choose one of those cities and you'll be entered to win dinner and 2 tickets to a show. So help us reach our goal and enter to win dinner and a show in the city of your choice. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
This program is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners. Show your support at heritageradionetwork.org/donate.
This week on Meat and Three, we bring you a sensational episode where each story hones in on one of the 4 senses that accompanies taste.
Many of the smells that we encounter in everyday life actually exist out there in the cosmos.
Food carries all these culturally specific meanings. The fact that, when you see an apple, it's not just an apple, right?
I was mostly interested in thinking about what knobs ASMR was pulling on maybe, or how we could explain it from a psychological or emotional or evolutionary standpoint.
Tune in to Meat and Three, HRN's weekly food news roundup, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Zev Rovine. We'll talk to Zev about the role of an importer, what is natural wine, and the working contract. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. You can't talk about natural wine in the U.S. without Zev Rovine being in the conversation. Waiter turned wine distributor, Zev started importing wines back in 2008 from small estates that are terroir-driven, practicing low intervention and organics. He is the proprietor of Zev Rovine Selections, importing wine from over a dozen countries and 140-plus wineries. In light of the pandemic and racial inequality, the industry continues to change. Zev has proposed a working contract or code of conduct to address sexism, racism, labor rights, and the stewardship of land in the wine business. Welcome to the Grape Nation, Zev.
Thanks for having me.
Due to COVID-19, because you're in Brooklyn and our studios are in Brooklyn, it would have been really nice to sit face-to-face, but because of the virus, we're doing a remote broadcast via Zencastr. I know your offices are in Brooklyn. Where are you right now?
I was working, we just moved our offices from one part of Bushwick to another, but it was a little hectic in there, so I went home to Clinton Hill, where I live, in a quiet spot.
Good for you. I had Patrick Capillo on a couple of weeks ago, and he literally did the interview from like the crushing wine pad outdoor at Pax Valley, with that beep beep of backing up trucks and all. That was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I want people to just, have a sense of who you are and, how you got to where you are. So just give me a brief background on your journey in life and wine. That got you, to your own business, Zev Rovine Selections, an influential natural wine importer. Give me the quick story.
All right. Well, first, thanks for the nice introduction.
Okay, you're welcome.
I wouldn't say some of those things about myself, but I appreciate you saying them.
They're all true, Zev. I don't under or overstate. It's all fact.
Right, well, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think longevity leads to that a little bit. We've been doing it for 12 plus years now.
Yeah.
And so, over that time, obviously, natural wine has sort of become a thing. I guess we're going to backtrack if I'm going to tell you,
tell me how you got there, because once we get there, that we're going to go crazy on all that other stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So I moved to New York when I was 20 years old. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I started working in restaurants. I moved to New York basically to play in a band and follow like a young dream.
Right.
And like a lot of people, I worked in restaurants, and there's a couple kind of like funny little stories. I had like wine in my upbringing. My stepfather always drank wine, and I always had a little glass at dinner and in school growing up. So there was sort of wine around me, but it wasn't like I came from like a wine family in any way. But I was working at this one restaurant, Butter, and there was this like contest where the waiter that sold the most glasses of I think it was Estancia Meritage would...
Not terrible.
Hey, this is like 2002, so
yeah.
Meritage was like this new exciting idea, and like I rehearsed the whole spiel, and I sold the shit out of it, and it was like over the course of a month, and I think it was a $17 glass pour, which for 2002 was pretty intense.
Yeah.
So you really had to like navigate how to communicate that in like a fair way, and and still make the sale and everything. And so I did that, and I won the contest, and the prize for winning the contest was a free entry to the ASA, the American Sommelier Association, like viticulture and vinification course. And so I took the course, and I got really into wine. I started, I was getting into wine through working, at various restaurants in New York. And this is like a great opportunity to deepen my knowledge. I got that like basic foundation of wine knowledge there. And then, of like guided the rest of my service career.
So winning that course from your great salesmanship is really what sort of solidified it and pointed you out in that direction of wine. That's fair to say.
I mean, look, it at least gave me like a marketable skill
right.
for future jobs.
Right.
That like I had this knowledge, and that like I really, have studied wine a lot, and that I can be like a quality wine service person, and, potentially a sommelier at a restaurant or an assistant sommelier or something like that. So it made you more special than just a waiter, which, at the
right.
time it was very hard to get really good service jobs. I mean, it obviously it's even harder right now. But, it was a way to develop my interest to possible employers, basically.
So there's your interest in wine. Where's the transition from, restaurants into the, other side of the business, which is importing, distributing, wholesaling? How does that come about?
So there's a stop for about 3 years in Utah. And I basically took over this little coffee shop that was inside of a bookstore. And this was, like 2004, 2007. And, it was kind of before Amazon was destroying bookstores, sort of Borders and Barnes & Noble were destroying bookstores. And the bookstore was struggling a little bit, and, Park City, Utah is a weird seasonal place. And so we basically got a wine permit for the coffee shop and put in a cheese counter, and basically did like charcuterie and cheese and like a little bit more, and had a wine selection. And we would do like these wine events where we would pick a region, and I would like guide a group through a tasting every Friday. And that was sort of just to like get business going, and it became super popular. And so for 3 years, I gave like an hour and a half to 2 hour, tasting seminar. And we would do, we did like a 24-week series on France. And so basically I would read and study up to be able to give the course. And I did every Friday for 3 years. And so I ended up learning a lot over that time, sort of just strengthening like my base of knowledge. And then...
where in Utah? I mean, were you around Salt Lake City? You weren't in the sticks, were you?
No, it was Park City. So if you know Utah, it's where the Sundance Film Festival is, and it's like a kind of like liberal little bubble up, you know, and like the Jetsons above Salt Lake City, above the smog, you know, really great ski town. So it was, it was a fun place to spend a few years. If you guys are listening to this, or you know Evan Lewandowski, his wines, he worked for me at the wine bar back in the day. That's kind of how he got his intro to wine. And then went on to
Ruth
go to school for it. Ruth Lewandowski, right? Yeah. To go to school for it and open his own winery. And, we've been selling his wines, of course, since his first bottle. And he's, one of my dearest, oldest friends, but that comes from, that relationship comes from that period.
All right. So you're in a coffee shop turned wine bar turned Friday tastings. We're still not up to how you became a wine importer.
Yeah, so in the end, the business didn't survive. We had a really big space, and the bookstore just wasn't able to create the revenue that was necessary. And so, we went out of business, and I was kind of trying to figure out different things that I was going to do. And I was sort of raising money for a restaurant in Park City, but I really wanted to move back to New York. And so I kind of came up with this idea of doing a wine import company. I had, consulted for some other wine import companies, and I kind of like had a little bit of an idea of what to do, but not a very strong idea. And so I tried to raise money for this restaurant. I had raised a bunch of it, and when I told everybody that I didn't want to do the restaurant anymore and that I wanted to start a wine import company and move back to New York City, pretty much everybody dropped out. With the exception of 4 couples who were regulars at my Friday tasting, and they each gave me a really little bit of money to be able to go and start the concept. And so that's what I did. And so I took the money and I started the business, and I got a little apartment again in Brooklyn near where I lived before. And I at the time I was selling a Spanish portfolio that was already imported by somebody else. I was going to do the local distribution with the idea of eventually being able to create enough revenue to be able to go buy a couple of pallets from France on my own.
Right. So the wine was in the States already imported. You were distributing it.
Right, that's how it started.
Your next step and dream was to get across, the pond and start, searching for wine.
Start my own French portfolio. I was always like most attracted to French wine, just because that's the way the textbooks are written. They all start with Bordeaux and then Burgundy and then Champagne, whatever, and then they go to all the other countries. And because like there's just like an esteem for it, and because it's just kind of like, I don't know, it romanced me. Maybe I like France. Maybe I like the language and everything. Right. And so I always had a thing for French wine. And so my goal was to distribute this other portfolio to be able to create enough revenue to go start importing some French wine. And so I achieved that goal.
I'm kind of jumping ahead because I want to talk about natural wine as a topic too. But when you had that desire, to focus on French wines, and France has been, the beginnings and the center of natural wines. Was that on the radar? Was that on your mind then, or that kind of came after?
So it was on my mind, but I didn't know. I wasn't able to articulate it. The terminology natural wine did exist, but it was like, not very common. Right. Especially, having spent, 3 years in Utah and then a year in San Francisco before that. So it would have been a while before I was in New York, where like natural wine in America had really started. But, I read the Kermit Lynch book, and all of the wines that I was most attracted to were the small production wines, the handmade style wines. I already had a strong like anti-Parker taste in my mouth.
That's not hard.
We're also sure, but now like nobody even gives a shit. Like nobody even knows who Robert Parker is anymore.
I know. It's so funny.
Then it was like this fight of small production versus like this uniformity of style that was getting like shaped based on like the point system.
He shaped Nap and he shaped Nap and he shaped Bordeaux. I mean,
and then Tuscany and then Piedmont and then everywhere, tried to make wines that were point based. And, I tasted with Robert Parker and one of his Spanish tasters one time. And, I saw the process that they did. And I really thought it was a bad process. And so I was really like soured against that. And so, my sentiment was like this artisanal, smaller production thing. I didn't have the vocabulary of natural wine yet. And I also don't think that I had come down on the partisan side of organic viticulture. I think I was like, these guys know what they're doing. Like they're trying to do their best. But, there were times in my travels to Europe that solidified that perspective. I think one of them was a time I saw a vineyard in France and in Spain, and there was a guy, walking by a machine. He had a hazmat suit on, and I think, boy, if you got to wear a hazmat suit to
that's bad.
to treat the grapes, like maybe we shouldn't be drinking that wine. And you just see vineyards that are, you go to one organic vineyard in a region where there's a lot of chemical, which is basically everywhere, and they'll just walk you in the vineyard and they'll say, look, here's the one with the chemicals. The ground is, hard like a tennis court, and you go into this other one and it's full of life and the ground is soft and there's weeds and diversity and bugs, and one looks like this healthy, vibrant ecosystem and one looks like this like really dead environment. And so for me it was just like, I did not like open the company with the intention of opening a natural wine company, but just like every sentiment, every thing that you saw made me go to one side rather than the other.
Right. So so fairly and squarely, it shouldn't be any way but that way. Taking care of the earth and creating a permaculture around the vineyards, and all of that, versus like you said, just padded down soil treated with chemicals.
Right. And, the more that we know about these chemicals, the more that we know that they have these like hugely long half-life, the systemic chemicals, and that they don't disappear just because they're out of, sight. They slowly work their way through the soil and into the water system and, do damage everywhere on the way to the ocean where they sit for 50 million years. So, we create these chemicals and they get injected to the earth and they're there for, basically ever. Certainly way past our lifetimes. So it's just like an unsustainable way to farm. And so, that seemed like an obvious thing.
So tell me, so you go into business as a wine importer. Just tell everyone briefly what the function of a wine importer distributor is. Because, people open a bottle, drink a glass of wine, they have no idea. They know it came from grapes in a vineyard, but from there to glass, just what's the function of a wine importer distributor?
It's it's a big conversation because they all function in sort of different ways. How
do you do it?
The government is set up with some regulations around wine or in alcohol more so than they are in like other goods that are being imported. So you have to deal with the FDA and you have to deal with the like legal structures of being like an importer or a distributor and selling across state lines and all this stuff. So the way that you get your wine in some place can be like sort of a somewhat complex trip through the supply chain. But, I think what an importer is by like the way that we think of importers right now is somebody who has a company and they go to whatever country to find wine. They develop a relationship with a winery and they buy a certain amount of wine. They put it on a boat, bring it back, put it in a warehouse, and then they go out on the street and make relationships with retailers and restaurants to sell them, bottle by bottle, case by case, or whatever.
Right. And it's not on a federal level, right? You have to do it state by state. True.
There's a lot of complexities to it. So you're allowed to do importation and distribution in certain states. In certain states, you're only allowed to be a distributor or an importer. So, we do a lot of different functions now. I'm a partner in a California distribution company that do the actual distribution. In New York, we basically self-distribute.
But we
in
talk
all,
about
in all the other states, we sell to a distributor, right? An independent company that might be a 2-person company or 1-person company in a small state, right? Who buys from a couple of us different importers and then resells it to the restaurants and retailers in their area. Or it might be a larger one, maybe a 20 or 30-person company where they're, doing the same thing in their state, but, in a market that's larger and more capable of handling a distributor of larger size. So there's like a million different sizes and styles of distributors out there, and they all based their work on how the states work. So some states even are monopoly states, Pennsylvania, Utah, where the government actually does the buying and the selling.
They're state stores.
State
so you talked about California. Your footprint now in the U.S. is multiple states?
Yeah, we sell in 40 states, I think.
Wow.
So we're in most of them. But, that sounds like a big number since,
it could be
there's only 50
cases
of them, 40 is like
state,
really
right?
big, right? It might be a small state that's like not actually buying that much because, but it's amazing. It's 2020 and natural wine is everywhere, and the interest for natural wine is really everywhere in places that you would never expect. Of course, when we started importing our first natural wines in 2009, 2010, nobody. It was hard to find accounts in New York City that wanted it, let alone, in Oklahoma or whatever. And now we get calls from distributors in, all the states, basically.
Isn't that crazy? It was only 10 years ago.
Yeah, it is really crazy that it's happened.
I mean, if you
years.
think about, you've been at it long enough and it seems like forever, but it was only 10 years ago. So you bring most of the 140, 50 plus wineries you deal with, the biggest chunk of those are in France?
Yeah, but definitely the largest number of actual wineries. We have some large wineries in Austria, or one in particular. So if you can break it down by sales or something, it might be a little different.
Yeah. What are newer growth areas where you feel good wines are coming out that are getting good response?
There are so many. I think Alsace is probably the most
underrated
and just really interesting right now, in terms of what's happened in the last 3 to 4 years in a region. I think Alsace has this incredible complexity of terroirs. They have an incredible complexity of grape varieties. There's just every type of variation of thing that you can do. And I think the old way was they would just bottle all these single vineyard Grand Cru wines or whatever. And those are barely distinguishable from each other unless you have an incredible palate and you can really do that. But if you're going to be a little bit more fun and you're going to start to do macerations and you're going to start to do pet nats and you're going to start to do, blends of fruits and grapes and all sorts of stuff, and you're going to use the creative set of what natural wine offers today, the palette of ingredients that's available in Alsace is incredible. It's so diverse and amazing.
And it's a good value. They're not expensive wines generally, right?
Not at all. It's such a good value. There's not really a lot of cheap wine in Alsace, I'll say, but there's not any really expensive wine there either. So it hits that mid-range really well.
Quality to value. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where else?
There's always cool little things happening in the Loire. We just opened a sake portfolio. I'm super excited about a lot of these
why
sakes.
Why pivot a little to sake? I mean, what drew your attention for that?
To be frank, there's an export company that sells them around Europe, and I've been I go to Europe all the time, and I eat and drink in the restaurants, and they have these incredible sakes that we don't have in America, and I started to learn about them, and there's this one in particular called Terada Honke, who
can you spell
grows
that for
his
me?
own rice, TRADA space HONKE.
Okay.
and, makes his own koji and grows his own rice and, ferments everything without yeast and has like this relationship with his staff that's really special.
Right.
We went there and learned a lot about how it all.
So it's
like a whole other podcast.
Yeah, it's a natural sake per se.
Yes, very much so, and it goes to the same philosophy that natural wine I think is really based on, which is that there was a way to make wine before all the chemicals got invented. All of those chemicals in the vineyard were invented in the 40s and, were proliferated in like the 50s, 60s, 70s. And the reason the fermentation stopped is because yeast complexes stopped growing in the vineyards because they were full of chemicals, and you needed something to get the fermentations going properly. And, there wasn't the right nutrition in the grapes, so you need to, add enzymes. And, one technology cutting corner, led to the need for a new technology. And that happened over and over to the point that wine became like far from the simple product of, grapes crushed in a vat. And so what Terada Honke is doing is very much going back to what sake was made like, 60, 70 years ago. And, when we think about natural wine and conventional wine and how like somehow they're like this like really, two sides of the political spectrum, it wasn't very long ago that all wines were natural wine because that was the only way to make wine. We're talking like into the middle of the 20th century. It's not like a super long time ago. So, so they were congruent to me in that way. And to me, that's like part of like the real essence of natural wine. I know that we said we would like try to define it at some point, but I think that is like a fundamental thing in it that is really important.
One last question about the business. I was going to ask you, how do you select the wineries? Obviously, one criteria is, practices, organic farming, which we discussed a little and we'll discuss more. What else? Is everything spoken for? Are there still people out there? Are people looking for representation? I know you travel, not lately, but, how do you select a winery? I'm sure there's people you turn down and people that you'd like that you can't get and people that you come across. How's that process work?
It happens through like just like tons and tons of travel, or I don't know, it happened for me through tons and tons of travel and really spending, for me, really spending the time to, go visit people even if you don't work with them, just to taste, just to talk, going to lots of trade shows, spending the time being diligent at
Makes
them,
sense.
tasting with people, having full conversations with them, going to the dinner parties, becoming friends with everybody, If a winery that you really like leaves their importer, you want to be the first one in their mind. It's like nice to be their friends.
It's
also nice to it's networking, but it's also nice to go out and drink wine with natural winemakers and talk to them about wine. I love sitting around barrels, tasting wine, talking about a winery's production. I find it to be like one of the most engaging and interesting conversations that you can have, because it like talks about somebody's like the little solutions that they come up with through artisanship. When you're like restricted to not using chemicals that make your job easier, you have to become very creative, and you have to use all of your craft and your hands and your mind and everything to do it. And talking about that is just a very joyful experience to me. So I like doing it even if they're like we don't have like a specific business interest in it. I like being
it makes
around
a lot
wine
of
culture.
sense. You never know what's going to happen,
Right. And so to answer the question that you asked earlier, which was, are there new wineries? Like, is everything taken? When I started, some very prominent wine importers told me that, you're stupid for doing this. Like, all the good wineries are taken. Like, there's no wine out there. And, that was sort of true. They weren't wrong about that. And like, that's the truth now. Too, like all the really great wineries are definitely taken. But there's new wineries all the time. Wineries leave importers all the time. The new generation, basically, like, in Europe, most of the people who own a winery are going to retire around like normal retirement age. Maybe a little bit later in the 60s or whatever, and their children take over the wineries, and their children in their 20s and their 30s or whatever, and they see the market, and they see that there's demand for natural wine, and they convert their parents' wineries into natural wineries.
Yeah.
Or a young person who's going to start their own winery from scratch. You know, most of these people that are going to start like a little 4-hectare winery from scratch is going to want to work organically, and is going to want to do, you know, put really nice labels on it and make pretty natural wines. It's just like it's just like a nicer environment. So, you know, there might not be a lot of great wineries out there that are not imported right now, but, you know, somebody's going to get the next one. And
seems to be people keep plugging away, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you got a good head start, but you know, there's guys out there, smaller guys, you know, that are grabbing, you know, whatever they can. And that's okay. All right. I want to talk to you about natural wine. I can't think of anybody better than you to, you know, get into this discussion. At the end of this discussion, you know, when we're kind of got through it, I want you to give me your definition of natural wine. You may have done it during the course of the discussion, but there was a recent article in Punch where you were prominently featured discussing the topic of natural wine and how it's defined. And now there's a certification by an organization in France called Syndicat de Défense des Vins Naturels. Are you familiar with these certifications?
I am, yes.
Does it make sense to have certification, and are these guys on the right track? I mean, you would have a good feel and know enough by now. What's your take on that?
I definitely think that it's a good idea, and these guys are the right people. You know, one of them is actually a winery. You know, the guy who like heads it up is a winery that I've imported for 10 years. And he is a tiny little winery, you know, and they make everything completely without sulfur, and are like, they have no like real commercial gain to this, except for the fact that they're trying to, I think, you know, have a definition and have something reliable for the consumer. You know, there's been a bunch of attempts over the years to have like a natural wine certification, and there's been different bodies, the AVN, the Association du Vin Naturel in France before that, and there was like a lot of like split factions on it because you know, the definition of natural wine keeps changing. You know, at first it was this thing of the like Gang of Five and Jules Chauvet and Marcel Lapierre and Foyat and all those guys in Beaujolais, and that was like and that first generation of it. And it has evolved 100 times since then, and there's been all these little, like, you know, sub movements and small movements, and you know, some people define it as 0-0, nothing added, nothing taken away, and then a lot that would preclude the founders of the movement, in fact, because you know, all the founders of the movement pretty much add a little bit of sulfur to at least a portion of their wines.
So 0-0, I just want everyone to understand. Explain to them, is the addition of a little sulfur.
Is the addition of a little sulfur, or I'm sorry, 0-0 is no sulfur. And I think like the second 0 refers to, so I think the 0-0 refers to nothing added, nothing taken away.
Right. But some natural legit guys do a little sulfur, you know, to protect the wines, right?
Well, look, it depends on how you define natural for you. You know what I mean? Like if you define natural as nothing added, then no, the original guys don't fit in that box anymore. If you consider natural wine, you know, that like there's a limit in your mind of how much sulfur can be added, and these guys are probably clearly under that, and they're back in the club. But that's the thing about this. There's 2
certifications, right? There's no sulfur and a little sulfur, exactly. And that makes sense. I mean, because you're not a proponent of no sulfur, never. It's sort of a necessary evil or ingredient at some point, right?
Look, I am a proponent of the winemaker being their own special individual. You know,
Right.
like what
That's the
makes
most
natural
important
wine
thing.
fun is that like each winemaker, what makes it special and I think different from the conventional world in a lot of ways is like the conventional world, everybody's trying to sort of arrive at the same thing, which is like this, like, let's take Bordeaux, for example, is this like, you know, bigger, richer, darker, longer, more complex red wine. And in natural wine, everybody's just trying to be like, you know, their own special, you know, flower. You know, they're trying to like they're trying to be expressive and artistic, and they're trying to, you know, make different wines and take chances and make strange things and nice things. And if it's your like feeling that sulfur, you know, really affects the soul of a wine, and like you don't think you're going to get true expression that way, then, you know, that's your definition of natural wine. If you think that you're trying to make something that's like a little bit more precise, that's like a little bit more stable, you know, that you're worried about the transport, you're worried about all sorts of things, like I'm not going to begrudge you for putting a little bit of sulfur in your wine. You know, both of those like perspectives I think are perfectly valid. You know, the really important thing for me is the vineyard work that you do, and, you know, and that you're like honest and communicative about what you do.
So to that point, I guess there's two questions here. Are people going to buy into it? Are the right people going to buy into it? You know, guys like you know, Isabelle Lejeune, whoever's important out there. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, okay, so you've laid down these, you know, guidelines. How do you check and monitor these, you know, certifications? And, you know, if people are kind of busting the rules, how do you enforce them? I mean, aren't those real problems?
Not really. I kind of think that this is like a mail-in ballot issue. You know, the organic or biodynamic certification, right? Like if we're talking about Europe, which is where this thing exists at this point, or EcoCert or Demeter if you're biodynamic, or like one of the other like governing bodies, and they come to your site and they take soil samples, leaf samples multiple times a year. It's not like a huge thing, but they come and do it and they test it, and you know, if you're spraying chemicals, like they'll find traces. And you know, so like there's this whole idea that like a lot of people are lying about the farming that they do. You know, I think if you're certified, like it's a little bit hard to lie. I'm sure you can like figure it out, but like it seems like more effort than it would be worth. And then, you know, with regards to the other part with the sulfur, you know, all you need is a lab analysis, and to be part of the one where there's no sulfur added, I'm pretty sure you have to submit a lab analysis, and you can see how much sulfur is in the wine. So
is there
it's not like it's super easy to fake all that, and like if you were trying to fake all that, like it sounds like it might be more work than it would be just to do it.
Right. Do you have to, I think you would agree with me that some wineries have, you know, impeccable practices, but they're not certified either because they don't want to be, or there's a cost. For this particular thing, is there going to be a cost for a winery to be part of it?
You know, I am not like a spokesman for this thing. I don't necessarily know every detail. I believe there is a cost for it.
I was just curious.
I would also call bullshit a little bit on that other thing that you said, though, that a lot of people, you know, will work impeccably but do not want to spend the money on the certification. That's not really a true. I hear that all the time, but you know, there's an EU subsidy that more than covers the expense of getting certified.
So the bullshit you're calling it's bullshit that people don't go the extra step because it's available to them to be certified if they're practicing. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Yes. So I'm happy that you brought that point up because I'm not defending anybody.
Sure. But I hear that all the time, you know, and I've heard that over the years, and I used to hear that more than I hear it now. And I just don't really buy it. Like it's just not a really believable story to me. I just know what it costs. I think for a 12 hectare winery, which is like, you know, making quite a lot of wine, the annual cost is like 1,500 euros to have the government come and do the checks, and it's not very much compared to like the revenue that you're doing on a 12-hectare winery. And there's a subsidy that covers it because they're trying to push people to doing more organics in Europe. So
I'm glad you brought that up.
Talk about the paperwork, like, I'm sorry, it's just not that much. And what is a lot of work and what is really expensive is working organically, right? Like, I think that's the thing that
the day-to-day practice.
The day-to-day practice, because there's a lot more individual labor that has to go into it, so that costs money. You have to go through the vines many, many more times a year to spray copper sulfate or whatever you're doing instead of fungicide. So you're hand tilling around vines, you're hand pruning, most likely. It's not really related to organics, but they often go hand in hand. And so there is like this big commitment of time and money that you're putting into working organically. So then to not do like a few hours a year of paperwork is like also just, I don't know, everybody has their own individual experience, but
I agree.
I think
agree
maybe if
that.
you're like really politically driven and you just hate the government, then maybe you're not going to do it.
Fair enough. Zev, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want you to give me your definition of natural wine, and then I want to talk about the working contract and a few other things. We're talking to Zev Rovine from Zev Rovine Selections. You're listening to The Grape Nation on Heritage Radio Network. We'll be right back.
All of us at HRN have been keeping busy, despite working and recording from home. This fall, we're proud to announce new shows on the network that each bring important and enlightening stories to listeners around the world. While the world is in turmoil and the future of our country is uncertain, there are certain constants that help keep us going. For us, food and storytelling are essential. While we can't come together in person, food podcasts from HRN provide a virtual table we can all gather around. Bringing exceptional stories to your ears and keeping you informed on the ever-changing political and environmental issues of our time is integral to our mission. At a time when the world around us is rapidly changing, HRN is committed to being here for our listening community, and we need you to be here for us. Join our table and help ensure the future of food radio by becoming a member of HRN. Go to heritageradionetwork.org/donate to make a contribution. Check out the latest additions to our lineup while you're there. You can see all of our series at heritageradionetwork.org/new show.
Okay, we're back. We're back with my guest, Zev Rovine. Zev is the proprietor of Zev Rovine Selections. He imports wines from many countries and many wineries with a slant towards natural wines. Zev, we just talked about, natural wine and trying to define the term and trying to get some kind of certification. I'm sure people ask you from time to time, because it's a very polarizing subject and question, how do you define natural wine? You have to have a definition in your mind because you have to apply that against, who you want to bring in. So what would you say to that?
I think like the elevator pitch answer is that it's a wine made from organic or biodynamically grown grapes that is fermented, aged, and bottled with no additives with the exception of sulfur, and the sulfur levels being somewhere under, 40 to 50 milligrams per liter added. That's like the real easy way to say it. If I find a wine that checks off all those boxes, it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to buy it. Right. I think that there is...
It could suck, right?
It could suck. Or the people could be assholes, or any number of reasons that where you have another wine in your portfolio that's like it or whatever. But yeah, I mean, For me, the definition of natural wine also goes further than those checkpoints. Like for my own aesthetic version of natural wine, it also includes, some level of artisanship. Some, we generally work with smaller wineries. We do have a couple of larger ones now. But, I think that even they will look at their wines and say, like, these are like really nice organic wines and these are natural wines. Right. Ones that they make with more care and more touch and in kind of more special ways and with even less additive.
I think another thing you can add to that, and it's a good segue into what I want to talk to you about, when you talk about natural wines, there's this respect for the land and, the ingredients, which is, minimal. But I think there's also a respect for the people that are involved in making those wines and how you treat them. And you've been working on this thing called the working contract, and I'm pretty sure you were working on this even before this Valentina Pasqualacqua incident. She's an Italian winemaker. I told you I didn't want to get into it or, make the show about it, but I just want you to, from your lips, just to explain to people, what the Pasqualacqua incident in Italy was. And then I really want to talk to you about the working contract.
Well, I think that, ethics are really a difficult thing because many times you are even doing your best to follow your ethics and taking like the financial aspects of decision making aside and putting ethics first, and you still don't know whether or not you're doing the right thing. Anything that I'm going to say about that, starts with that. It is not easy to be a judge. It is not easy to, one's decisions in these realms has really big effects on wineries, on, their staff, on the land, on all that kind of stuff. So any decisions like the one that happened with Valentina is one that I took, with a huge amount of responsibility, and one that, time will tell, really. I really think that Valentina personally has paid all of her workers properly.
But go back for a second. Her dad is a fruit, whatever, wholesaler.
Yeah, her dad is has a marble quarry and also makes vegetables and fruit in a conventional style way. And there are labor camps basically in Puglia and in some other parts of Italy where they're basically holding, where something approximate to the mafia is holding workers in a village, and they will truck them to different work sites, and presumably her father, and he's not been convicted of it, but he's been charged with it, has used those workers in the past in his business. And so, there is a clear separation between her business and his business. I don't believe that she ever did that for her winery. I think that she's had, people come and legally audit and make that statement in a clear way. But for me, there was a connection to it all that I was uncomfortable with.
Not to interrupt, but so everyone knows, the reason we're talking about this is Valentina is someone that was in your portfolio, was in your portfolio. Beyond being what it was, it's something that's connected to you. So go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, it happened. I looked at the situation and I thought that I was never going to be able to truly find, all of the truth of it, because
how
big affair that includes, generational wealth in this area that's got a long history of labor rights abuses and mafia and, and Italian government and the church, and like this is like this super big complex situation,
right?
And it was one that I wanted to distance myself from, because it wasn't worth the potentiality of financially supporting that type of labor work. The risk of that being true were not worth the benefit to me. So
right.
the doubt was enough for me to to step away from importing her wine.
Okay. So getting back to the working contract, the working contract involves people, values, ethics, and all that. Tell me what your working contract is, how it came about, why now?
It's something that I've considered for a long time, like you mentioned. But I do think that part of it is the polarity of our politics. And I think part of it has been that one of the things that's really come out, and not just over the Trump administration, but this is over, I don't know, the last 10, 15 years, where these far right groups in Europe, and we see them all the time, the Front National in France, and just the outward, support of a political party that is really bordering on, a lot of fascist ideas, and that is anti-immigration, that is not really aligned with my politics. And we have this incredible power in that, we spend a lot of money on wine. We buy wine for large groups of people, basically. So, it's not like the money passes through us. And I don't want to vote with those dollars to people who are voting for political parties that don't align with my ethics. That clearly don't, the really far right ones. There's other issues in our industry that are rampant forever. A lot of sexism issues. It's a male dominated industry.
White male dominated.
That I was going to get to that next.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
But the number of stories that I've heard of people getting groped in wine situations, and even very much in the natural wine world. It happens in our world too. We're not better than the conventional wine world in that regard. So we don't want to work with people who make, who assault people, who make people feel uncomfortable, who say things that make people feel uncomfortable. We want to work with people who have an inclusive view of who we want in our world. And then yes, it's, wine is a colonialist movement, and it is a very white one. And we don't want to be involved with people who are not making, especially in our country, Black people not feel comfortable, people of color in general, in our environment. We want to do a way better job than we have at being an inclusive environment, because the natural wine world is not better than the conventional wine world on this. You go to the big trade shows all over the place, it's just white people all over the place. And I've heard a lot of stories from people of color in natural wine places where they aren't made to really feel comfortable, and they in fact prefer to be in conventional wine spaces because they get treated with more respect. And, that's such a sad, heartbreaking thing, because I think the way that we think of ourselves in natural wine is as progressives and liberals and inclusive. Right. But, I think that, I hate to do this, but to use a golf analogy, hit the ball never lies, right? It does what your thing did. When you look at the people who are in our spaces, they're overwhelmingly white. There's something's happening there. You know what I mean? That this is not a welcome place. So, so we have to do everything to address those issues. The other part of the working contract, by the way, sorry to cut you off, also has to do with labor rights issues. There's a bunch of regions around the world, California, some southern parts of Italy, southern parts of Spain, where there is regular labor rights abuses in the agricultural realm. And so part of our working contract is that that everybody is paying everybody properly and giving proper insurance and hopefully paying above legal minimum wage.
It makes sense the way your business is structured, because the people you deal with are really farmer winemakers, not wine companies, right?
Right. We're dealing with the people who are paying the salaries themselves, right? So they know what's going on.
Right.
And they make the choices about what's going on. And, to be in this idea of natural wine where we think that we're selling a better product, which we do. I mean, I do think that natural wine is a better product than conventional wine. It's not full of chemicals. It is made by the ideas that terroir, defined initially in a way that I think conventional wine doesn't. But, all that doesn't matter at all if we're abusing our labor. So it's they're completely, all that is moot, stupid shit. I mean, it's just it's aesthetic and preference and style, and it means nothing at all if we're out abusing people. So
I agree. Two things, and then I want to try to get to our wine list. Two things. Is this something you're creating for your company, or you feel that for sure, but beyond, you could bring it to, restaurants, other companies? And why wasn't this done sooner? I mean, you and I know this crap's been going on for years and years.
Well, I think that first, I'm doing it for my company. Internally, we're writing a version of it for all of my staff and myself and everybody to sign and have a standard of our own current conduct. And then we're adapting that for the conduct that we expect of our winery partners. Let's also not forget that there's all sorts of abuses that happen in restaurants and restaurant culture here in America. I mean, that I think that there should be also a standard that, places are signing that think of themselves as more ethical, that they're paying their dishwashers and bussers and runners and everybody that, might not normally, might be immigrant labor that's not getting, the normal protections by the government, that they're treating those people well, even if they're paying them under the table. So, I think there's all of us need to reflect, and all of us need to take a look at what we're doing. So to answer the question about whether or not I offer this contract for anybody else to use, I would love to. We have no problem with anybody else just absolutely putting their better head on the top of it and using it as well. They have to do that though, right? We opened at a time where, we have only organic producers now. We're able to sign that contract in our work. Some other importers have a mix of both. It's not actually going to be easy for everybody to just use it.
Right. And why not sooner? I mean, why did we need a pandemic and, George Floyd to illuminate, how effed up everything is?
I think that this is one of these things where we who think of ourselves as little companies or artisanal things think that things are implied. And they're not, right? In big corporations, you do have contracts like this. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You sign a contract and a code of ethics that you're supposed to.
An employee won't be hired unless they sign it.
Right, but we all just think here in little business world that we have some sort of oversight because we're somehow better people, that this stuff is not going to happen. And so it does exist in our culture. It just doesn't exist in little natural wine yet. And it's partly because, you got to, we're writing it with, with some labor rights lawyers, and we're writing it with some people who
you're being inclusive in who you're consulting.
Good work in equity and those types of things. People are really experienced and really know what they're doing. I'm not just sitting here writing a fucking constitution type of thing. I'm not educated enough in the realm of equity to write a portion of that. I'm not qualified to write the portion on sexism and how it affects our industry. But so we're outsourcing all that work to the people who we really think are, qualified to do it, and their names will be on it, and it'll be like an evolving document as time goes on. But
well, I want to check back with you at some point, and see how far and how well that has gone. I want to, not to brush that aside, but I want to move on because we have about 5 minutes left, Zev. I want to get your take on, what you're drinking and thinking now. I want you to answer our wine list. It's 5 questions. I ask all my guests the same 5 questions. Don't dwell on it. Be spontaneous. And let's try to move quickly. So the first question is, what are you drinking now? What are you trying? What's in your fridge? What have the seasonal changes brought? New producers, new areas? What are you drinking now?
I hate to promote our portfolio, but I've been drinking a lot of sake this year, and it has been an absolute revelation. The sake without, alcohol added to it, without filtration, that are like high or low polished, high rice proportions to them, are just amazing tasting things that go with so much different food.
Tell people something, because sake is, this artisanally made thing, but I guess during the World War or whatever, to either increase volume or production, they added alcohol, and that became a practice. And obviously your guy is not doing that.
Right. Our guy is not doing that. And then the other thing that he's doing that I think is really distinctive is, it's very humid in Japan. And so growing rice without chemicals, you lose a really big portion of your crop. And so you kind of can't financially do it unless you lower the polish on the rice. So it's kind of like perceived right now in like conventional sake that the more you polish it and the kind of less ricey it tastes, that the finer it is. And this is like throwing that idea out and saying we want it to be ricey. We want to we want to highlight the rice. And so you have the double benefit of being able to have it fit into your balance sheet, but then also you are getting like these like really deep rice flavors, which to me are like really compelling and amazing.
Like you said, that's another show. All right, You got to be quick on these. Okay. Do you have a favorite wine and food pairing? Not something you eat every night, every month, but is there something that, it's the silliest question on the list, but.
No. I really love, look, my favorite wine is lighter style red wine. And so I love Burgundy and I love Beaujolais and I love Jura type things, and they really evoke like mushroomy flavors, and I love mushrooms, and so I love like mushroom style dishes with light red wines.
That's a good one. You should be able to answer this one, easily. Your favorite wine restaurant and/or bar? People that have the selection, the knowledge, the vibe, the environment. I mean, I guess let's stay with New York, Brooklyn, this area. Is there any place that stands out?
I absolutely cannot answer that question, actually,
because it would be, you would exclude people?
Yeah, of course. I have so many clients and friends, and there's so many very good ones, and so I can make a big list. But
wait, wise guy, calm down. I'm not going to put you in the spot, and I always know that's the answer, and I didn't get a chance to say it. Would you say that, not in attempting to answer that question, but categorically we're talking about like well-known wine bars, like 10 Bells in June and blah, blah, blah. Not that those are them, but you lean more towards places that service those kind of wine lists?
We definitely, those are like the natural wine places.
So we'll leave it at that.
So we'll keep it a natural wine. I could answer though.
Go ahead.
Let's say Vervolay in Paris is one of the places that I
Spell
find
it
to
for
be
me.
Like an incredible place. You
Spell
say
it.
Estella for you?
Estella it's called?
Oh, no. Did you say Stellar?
No. Spell the place in France, because I didn't hear it.
I'm sorry. Spell it. Verre, Verre, Vole, Vole.
Okay. All right. So you did answer the question without getting in trouble. All right. So we'll move off of that. We have 2 more questions, then we got to wrap up. Do you have a favorite all-time wine? Just so you know, when we've been doing this podcast 4 years now. When I put that question in, I was trying to evoke out of people, what's the most expensive rare wine you ever drank? We so far moved from that question. What's the wine that had the impact on you? That was, a life-changing thing or an awareness thing for you. Is there an important wine to you?
Super easy for me.
Shoot.
It was Cornelissen. It was Mungibel Bianco, number 4. And I had never had a macerated wine. I had never had a wine that like had all those characteristics. It had all those flavors to it, and it was like just absolutely nothing I had ever had before in my life.
What year was that about?
That was in maybe 2008.
Okay, so not that long ago. That's exactly the answer I'm looking for. That's an important wine to you. Last question, and nobody better than you can answer this. I want you to recommend the best wine around $15-20. I want you to recommend a red. I want you to recommend a white. It could be within your portfolio, outside. It could be from anywhere. The setup is my kids are in their 20s. They can't show up at a dinner or bring a gift with a crappy supermarket wine. They don't have the jack to spend, $40, $50. So how are they wowing people? 15, 20, $22. You can go category, like Muscadet is a great value. Give me a good red suggestion and a good white suggestion.
Yeah, sure. I will, let's see. I will try to do something that is definitely not in our portfolio. I'm just going to do a little quick. It's tough to do it from France right now because everything from France has a 25% tariff on it because of Trump's stupid tax with the Airbus thing. So that makes it a little bit difficult. But I was thinking like Puzelat and Moss and all those kind of like founding guys from the Loire Valley that make like amazing light red wines and sort of like more dense white wines that are all in that price range.
All right. So those are good ones. Wait, so Puzelat for white?
Let's go... all right, let's do... I guess this has to be like fairly easy to find. That makes it...
Well, that's the other thing.
Funny.
Yeah.
Hervé Villemade makes amazing Courcheverny that I think is really good.
Spell his last name for me because I post everything.
Okay, Villemade, Villemade.
Okay.
And then let's say, what is a nice, fun, inexpensive, good red wine? Oh man, it's so hard. There's so many. I love Christian Vanier, Venier. I know I'm staying really centralized in one part of the Loire, but his red wines are amazing.
So
maybe
that's good enough. Yeah, I just wanted a couple because, like I said, I post the list and everyone is curious what the guests are drinking, and this is your business, and you sort of got out of your own realm, which was kind of cool. Zev, we got to wrap up. Like I told you, an hour would go by pretty quickly. We actually ran late. My engineer's going to kill me. I just got to do a quick wrap up and we're going to say goodbye. No, all me, not you. So if you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Subscribe to our podcast and subscribe to the Grape Nation podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or now wherever you get your pods. You can follow us on Facebook at The Grape Nation. On Instagram, we're at SBenRuby. On Twitter, we're at BenRuby. But on both, you can use the hashtag The Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we'll post Zev's wine list with some interesting recommendations on our social media sites. Zev, if people were very compelled by this interview and want to know more about what you're doing, what do they do to know more about Zev Rovine Selections, whether they're in the business or where to find the wines or anything in between?
I mean, certainly follow us on Instagram. We post all our wines all the time.
At Zev Rovine Selections?
At Zev Rovine Selections.
ZEVROVINE Selections. And then what was the other thing?
I don't know. You can send me an email if you wanted to know something specific. Zev@zerswines.com.
Okay, Zev at ZRS Wines. That's very generous of you. All right, that's good enough. I want to thank our guest, Zev Rovine from Zev Rovine Selections. Very interesting conversation, Zev. A lot of stuff going on. Thank you to our engineer, Amanda, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam BenRuby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join the HRN family by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. And thanks for listening.